Hello, dear Argonauts. I am Erik Vassilev, and you are now watching episode 1 of the series In the Footsteps of the Ancients. Our team is embarking on a journey with the ambitious goal of tracing back through time to the cultures that laid the foundations of human civilization. As you can see, we've set ourselves quite a task. Let's try together to explore the history of our ancient ancestors, the ones without whom we wouldn't be here today. Or watching YouTube videos for that matter, or give our opinions in arguing with complete strangers on Facebook. Our team hopes to be your faithful guide, researcher, and detective, earning your trust along the way. We'll strive to examine facts, hypotheses, and interpretations with impartiality. We sincerely hope to dispel some misconceptions and falsehoods, as well as expose many outright fabrications concerning ancient history. Stay with us if you truly want to learn something new.
Please stay tuned.
Now let's find 2 or 3 ancient traces. Our pilot episode is dedicated to one of the most mysterious rock phenomena known from the territory of Bulgaria, the Eastern Rhodope trapezoidal recesses. These mysterious rock-hewn forms have been fascinating scientists, researchers, and travelers for more than 100 years who have repeatedly tried to unravel their origin and purpose. We would hardly be wrong if we say that Bulgarian archaeologists are still at the very beginning of their research dedicated to trapezoidal recesses. Bulgarian historical science is still faced with many unknowns related to these monuments. As of today, according to the Bulgarian National Archaeological Map and the database of independent researcher Hristo Todev, the number of trapezoidal recesses is 4,500 units, and their number continues to grow. In the last 2 years, a completely new site with trapezoidal recesses was registered on the land of the village of Golobrad. Other unknown units were registered at sites not far from the village of Bezvodno. New recesses were also registered in the vicinity of the town of Majorovo, as well as at already known sites such as Harmankaya near the village of Bivolyan. Perhaps it is unknown to you that similar trapezoidal recesses have been registered on the territory of the Republic of North Macedonia, at some prehistoric archaeological sites on the territory of Kumanovo and Kratovo municipalities. Horizontal trapezoidal beta-like cuttings, similar, are extremely characteristic of most archaeological sites from the area of the town of Prilep. But the closest in terms of cutting technique are the rock niches located on the slopes of Buk Mountain near the town of Eger in Hungary. Most of these sites are completely unknown and intriguing to the general public. We promise to introduce you to all of them in our upcoming episodes of the In the Footsteps of the Ancients series. Let us now return to the specific subject of our episode 1, the Eastern Rhodope trapezoidal recesses, and try to lift the curtain and sift the facts from the misconceptions. We'll begin with the misconceptions that some of you take as irrefutable facts. It is a misconception that these monuments are Thracian recesses, as by Thracian is meant, made by the ancient Thracians. Undoubtedly, trapezoidal recesses are the most common rock-hewn monuments on the territory of the Eastern Rhodopes, which was part of ancient Thrace in antiquity. For a long time, Bulgarian scholars regarded them as cultic structures, carved by the ancient Thracians during the Bronze or Iron Age, probably related to funeral rituals, or to those dedicated to the cult of the sun. However, these initial interpretations have not been supported by either archaeological or other interdisciplinary research. These are actually conjectures which, due to a lack of scientific research, quite understandably came into circulation in the scientific literature of Socialist People's Republic of Bulgaria in the 1970s and almost acquired the status of irrefutable truths as soon as some dignified professors said so It's true. These mysterious rock monuments were recognized, not to say appropriated, by the so-called Bulgarian Thraciologists after the First International Congress of Thraciology held in Sofia in 1972. Since then, by inertia, some Bulgarian scholars continue to call them Thracian rock recesses, and this label is passionately used by all sorts of alternative researchers and casual theorists who exercise their not particularly rich imagination on the subject, which includes elaborate Thracian mysticism and Thracian gibberish, but spinning around this utter nonsense quickly drift away from the factuality of concrete scientific research, since in the last 30 years of transition in Bulgaria, there is a lack of consistent funding for archaeological and any other scientific research, and many scientists and researchers compensate by emphasizing the universally recognized interpretation of the Thracian rock recesses. This mild Thracian far-fetched concept sounded well in scientific publications before the end of communism. Such were the trends in Bulgarian history and archaeology, generously encouraged by the desire of some progressive-minded elements in the Bulgarian Communist Party, the People's Republic of Bulgaria, to push back from the long hand of the USSR and take its star place among the nations with a unique ethnic origin. Here, it might be good to mention a very popular joke during the time of socialism. Knowing how well-educated an engineer I am, I'm afraid to go to the doctors. It will be a little difficult for us to avoid generalizing in the hope that perhaps this anecdote does not apply to the circles of archaeologists and historians of this period, or at least not to all. At this stage, from all the known facts about the Eastern Rhodope trapezoidal recesses, we can assume that the scientific value of some hypotheses from the communist period, including the one with the Thracian rock recesses, is questionable, to say the least. In this line of thought, the second and perhaps biggest misconception that continues to be circulated is that the trapezoidal recesses were used to place urns containing the ashes of deceased members of Thracian society. However, traces of such urns have never been found at sites including trapezoidal recesses from the territory of the Eastern Rhodopes. Archaeological studies in the last 100 years have conclusively proven that the funeral rituals of the Thracians included cremation and burial under mounds or in necropolises. There is no logical explanation for the urn use hypothesis. The only non-scientific explanation why burial urns had to be placed in almost completely inaccessible places in trapezoidal recesses hewn with a slight slope where it would be difficult to fix any object is directly related to the desire of some scholars to associate the trapezoidal recesses with the Great Mother Goddess and her solar sun, that is, with the so-called Thracian Orphism. But we must remind again that the evidence base for these hypotheses is, to put it mildly, controversial and rather non-existent. Another outstanding misconception with an ancient Thracian flavor involving the mother goddess and her solar sun is the improbable hypothesis that the trapezoidal recesses were carved as part of an initiation rite during which a Thracian youth had to pass an ordeal suspended between heaven and earth and leave a gift of the great mother goddess and of course her solar sun in the trapezoidal recess. Information about such assumptions is also not found in written sources and is not supported by archaeological research. But on the other hand, many of the admirers of Thracian Orphism regularly launch such hypotheses, presenting them as almost absolute and irrefutable truth. In our team, the doubt has long arisen that there are Bulgarian scholars who are also time travelers and know personally Orpheus, Eurydice, and probably their entire ancient Thracian family. And no matter how much we try to leave the fantasy science aside, it stubbornly refuses to let us go, as it has a hand in the next misconception as well. And it is claimed that the trapezoidal recesses date from the Late Bronze Age or the Early Iron Age. Various scholarly publications mention these periods without any supporting research, findings, or written sources. Once again, the suspicion arises that some scholars are time travelers who personally knew the ancient Thracian bronze, or Iron Age stonemasons who carved the trapezoidal recesses. For the sake of historical scholarship, please provide us with some photographic material, if your time travel technology allows for the transmission of photographic data, of course. And once more, we find ourselves unable to hide from the realm of science fiction as we proceed to the next misconception. Misconception number 5 links certain medieval folk beliefs involving recesses and other rock-hewn carvings to legends about Crowley Marco, and even to the Thracians and the so-called Thracian Orphism. Naturally, this doesn't stop some Bulgarian scholars who seem to consider themselves direct witnesses to multiple historical epics from publishing elaborate cultural interpretations that suggest a direct connection between the trapezoidal recesses and Crowley Marco, the heroic protector who allegedly lived within the rocks. This latest cobbled-together hypothesis might just close the door on the subject. Folk beliefs from the past few centuries are undeniably intriguing from a scientific standpoint. Even more fascinating, however, is the scientific imagination that sublimates unquestionable connections between folklore, rituals, and ceremonies, despite the complete lack of evidence regarding how these traditions originated, which peoples or tribes introduced them to the Balkans, or whether they emerged locally. It should not be overlooked that both medieval Bulgarian states encompassed vast territories, and their populations were, to say the least, ethnically diverse. The next misconception, mainly promoted by enthusiasts of Thracian Orphism, is that trapezoidal recesses are mysteriously linked to the so-called Orphic mysteries. Some authors interpret clusters of recesses as resembling beehives and, based on this idea, associate them with bees, symbolizing the priestesses of the great mother goddess in Thracian culture. This vague and unproven connection is often presented as both undeniable and all-encompassing. These interpretations are, to put it mildly, controversial. Let's not forget that the available evidence, where it exists, is unreliable and originates from much later periods when folk beliefs were fundamentally different. It is true that local Turkish-speaking communities in the Eastern Rhodopes have preserved names such as Kovankaya, Bee Rock, and Kovanjik, beehive, in reference to these recesses. However, it is equally true that the same recesses are also known as Geneviz Penjuri, meaning Genoese windows in the local Turkish dialect. These names reflect the perceptions of ordinary people in later historical contexts regarding the purpose and origin of these rock carvings. Any fantastical and less than scientific theories from the socialist era of Bulgarian historical scholarship are best filed under a different kind of Thracian brew, and with that, we can call it a day.
Здравия, другари!
And so that you don't get the impression that we consider the ancient Thracians and their religious beliefs insignificant, let us turn to a well-established fact confirmed through genuine archaeological research. At the summit of the rock massif Hambar Kaya, near the village of Dolno Cherkovishte, whose facade is marked by trapezoidal recesses, 2 chambers have been carved using iron tools. Some scholars have described these as tombs dating to the Iron Age. Above Hambar Kaya, lies the Thracian rock sanctuary, Kaya. The fact that the trapezoidal recesses are integrated into a later construction is a compelling example of how this sacred space was reused by different cultural communities across various historical periods. We observe a similar phenomenon at the archaeological site Gluhita Kameni, where near the massive rock formations bearing trapezoidal recesses, archaeologist Georgi Nekhrizov and his team uncovered findings proving the presence of the ancient Thracians and the continued use of the site as a cult center in later periods, all the way into the Middle Ages. The next, even greater misconception, which over the past 20 years has been circulating mostly online among enthusiasts of positive energy, is the idea that trapezoidal recesses were places for meditation. You sit inside the recess, recharge your energy, and then, perhaps, take off into the cosmos feeling renewed and reborn. Just to share a small detail, access to the higher cut recesses is quite difficult, even for a trained climber. The attempt to sit inside one of them is a real punishment, especially if you have an average height and weight. Perhaps this is the right moment to point out that anyone eager to meditate in a trapezoidal recess risks an injury, should they take this endeavor too seriously or too spiritually. An even more incredible misconception is the idea that some aliens in flying saucers, after visiting Atlantis, made a quick detour to the Eastern Rhodopes, and, using some extremely mystical, mysterious, and utterly inexplicable technology involving the melting of rocks, created around 4,000 trapezoidal recesses, and then flew off somewhere else in the universe to melt more of them on various other planets. It's honestly difficult to imagine in whose mind this metallurgical sci-fi hypothesis was born, and how many glasses of rakia were involved in the process. At this point, we can safely close the door on such fantasies about the trapezoidal recesses, and instead turn to the fact that the most recent interdisciplinary scientific research on the subject has been published in the book Rock Mysteries: Investigations in the Eastern Rhodopes, authored by Associate Professor Stefanka Ivanova. She worked with a large team of scholars, including archaeoastronomers Dimitar and Vasilina Kolovi, the late Professor Anna Raduncheva, Professor Tsanko Tsankov, Professor Nikolai Spasov, Professor David Streit, Professor Ruslan Kostov, Associate Professor Maria Gyurova, Maria Zlatkova, Dr. Anna Mateus, Christo Todev, Stoyan Petkov, Svetlozar Dacov, Nikola Stanev, Nikolai Genov, Velizar Asparukhov, Ivo Tachev, and Stoyan Petkov. This extensive research team began its work in 2004 and remained active for a full decade. Their efforts focused on the study of rock-cut structures across the Eastern Rhodopes, with the ambitious goal of laying the foundations for a serious scientific exploration of the region's trapezoidal recesses. Let us emphasize that clearly: real, scientific research. But before that can take hold, we may have to endure a few more rounds of fantastical chatter, mostly coming from individuals with questionable academic credentials. True scholars, as a rule, remain in the background because they understand the weight of their claims. That's all for today, dear Argonauts. Thank you for bearing with us this far. We've prepared many more exciting topics for the upcoming episodes of In the Footsteps of the Ancients, and we can't wait to share them with you. In the second part of this first episode, dedicated to the trapezoidal recesses of the Eastern Rhodopes. We'll continue our trail hunting adventure and present both the well-known and the lesser-known facts about these monuments. At the risk of sounding repetitive, we kindly remind you to subscribe to our channel in the footsteps of the ancients and hit the bell so you don't miss any new videos. We hope you found this episode engaging and informative. Our team doesn't claim to be the ultimate authority, but we do stand firmly for accuracy and, above all, His Majesty, common sense. See you soon on the trail of the ancients.